I have thoroughly enjoyed this week. I'm sad that it's over. Nice last night, and I really appreciate you letting me be here. I've grown from it. There are things I identified in my own life where I realized I was ignoring, and so we all grow. We should see ourselves, and sometimes it's really hard to see ourselves for who we are. And I'm hoping that you were challenged this week as well to look at yourself in the mirror and see if you're actually living according to what God says. But I certainly appreciate the hospitality. I feel like I'm one of you guys now, and I appreciate that very much. If you are on Facebook, look me up and send me a friend request. That'd be great. I'll remember you guys, and I appreciate it. Several of you very much went out of your way to befriend me, and I thank you for it. I'll never forget an experience I had with an elderly gentleman. He was elderly because he was older than me. He was probably early 70s. And he was sitting at my desk weeping. And the reason he was weeping was because he felt like he was lost. He's a faithful Christian. He has actually been through a lot. He was not a Christian. He was an idiot because he'd go to church every time the doors were open. Why do you waste your time up there? So he'd been through a lot. He was, I consider him a strong, faithful Christian. He's weeping at my desk because he's worried, he's scared to death he's going to go to hell. And I asked him, what did you do? What have you done that's so bad? And he had a shocked look on his face from that question, which is strange. But he looked at me and he said, I didn't do anything. I said, what's the problem then? I haven't done enough. That was basically his problem. He was worried to death that he had missed some things in his life, and now he's weeping literally at my desk because he's afraid he's going to go to hell because he hasn't done enough. That's a problem. And it's not just that man. I've run across a lot of people that way. And ladies, I don't want to be sexist, but you have a great ability to beat yourselves up a lot more than men do. And you can feel guilty about all kinds of stuff, especially about being a mother. There's so many reasons for you, whether you're working or not working. If you work, you feel guilty for not working. If you don't work, you feel guilty because you're not supporting the family. All kinds of things that you feel guilty for. I mean, men do this too, right? We all have this ability to beat ourselves down, and really that's part of who we are. We want to make sure that we're right, but at the same time, I've run across people, person after person, come to me. Strong, faithful Christians, godly women who have come up to me and said, I don't know if I'm going to make it to heaven. Why not? Because I don't think I'm doing enough. Well, this isn't a lesson that we're not going to go through 1 John, but if you feel that way, you need to read 1 John. That's what it's designed for. But at the same time, I want to address why you might feel that way. And one of the reasons that people feel that way is because of this, I call it the curse, the curse of the sin of omission. That's what we have in James chapter 4 at the end. That as we have taken a verse and instead of putting it in the context that it deserves and thinking of it in a rational way that is also in combination with other scriptures and in a balanced approach, we have gone to extremes. And the extreme here is chapter 4 in verse 17. It says, therefore to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. And the extreme thought here is that there is always something better than I can do. And I'm going to take this to this rational end of thinking the way that this text is usually taught. There's always something better that you can do. If you're out at a ball game, you could be having a Bible study instead of doing that. There's always an instance where you can look at yourself and say, I can be doing something better now. Therefore, I'm not doing something that I should be doing, and therefore, I'm sinning. Now, that's a ridiculous idea, but if we're honest, a lot of people think that way, and a lot of people have taught that way and have been taught that way, and it drives them crazy because they can't figure out how to balance things and make it to where they feel comfortable as a Christian because they're always afraid they're missing something. I'm missing out on something. Now, I'm not going to explain the verse away, I'm not going to say, well, it doesn't mean that, and not give you an explanation of what it does mean. I'm going to give you hopefully a rational look at what this verse is talking about. And yes, it is, in a sense, it is talking about the failure to do, but I'm going to put it in the context of everything else we've talked about this week. And I'm hoping that will be an encouragement to you and not a discouragement. We take it literally, and I mean, a lot of people have come to me over this. That's why I think it's important to think about. And you may all have no problem with this whatsoever, but I've seen it a lot. And so if you are thinking, well, you're constantly guilting yourself because you haven't done enough, consider some things here. If you want to approach it from just a logical standpoint, think about the best possible thing you could do at any given time in your life would be what? I would put it either as, well, honestly, I would put it as worship. I'm going to worship God at every opportunity, every instance in my life. I'm going to spend it in worship to God. And if I'm not doing that, if I wanted to take this to its logical end, then, hey, if I'm not doing that, then I know to do good. I know that worship is the best thing I could possibly do right now, and I'm not doing it, therefore I'm sinning. Even though I may be doing something good, it's still not as good as it could be. You see the logical, the irrationality that is? And if we take it to that extreme, which unfortunately we have sometimes, I don't know if it's been taught that way, but we tend to put it that way in our own minds. We could look at the life of Jesus and see that he didn't spend all day, every day, 24 hours a day worshiping the Father. He didn't do it. Did that mean Jesus sinned too? Obviously not. So we have to look at this verse in its context, or we really are going to, Satan can use it to beat us up. And the book of 1 John teaches us that if you don't know without a doubt that you're going to heaven, there is a problem. You can know that you're going to be saved. You can have great confidence in your salvation. You can stand up and say, I know without a doubt that I'm going to go to heaven. And he even gives you tests. I wish I could preach 1 John tonight. He even gives you tests to take, to see, to prove to yourself, to build that confidence. Read through that book. But I do want to read one verse, and this is something that really is a key, I think, for this kind of thinking. 1 John chapter 3. And in verse 19 and 20, I'll read two verses. It says, by this we know that we are of the truth and shall assure our hearts before him. Okay, I'm going to read three verses. I lied. Verse 18. My little children, let us not love in word or tongue, but in deed and in truth. And by this we know that we're of the truth. By what? By loving, not in word, but in deed and in truth. If we love other people, that's one of the great tests he has in there. He's actually two tests. You love and you obey. That's the only way you can look at it. So he says in verse 18, if you love, make sure you love in deed and in truth. In verse 19, this will assure your hearts before him. And in verse 20, and he says, for if our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart and knows all things. That tells me that even if you feel like you're lost, you can still be saved. It doesn't matter how you feel about yourself. That is not aren't you glad that you aren't the determining factor of whether or not you're lost or saved in that sense? You can feel like you're lost all you want to, but that doesn't mean you are. On the other hand, there are a lot of people in the religious world that feel like they're saved, and they're not. It doesn't matter how you feel. It matters what you do and how you live your life. That is the crux of the matter when we're talking about James. That's all I've been saying all week long, is you make a decision to do what God tells you to do, to live according to the way he proposes that you live, and your life will be better. You will have the fruit of the Spirit. You will have joy beyond anything that you can imagine. That's the promise that we have. So that's why he starts out in James chapter 1 and verse 2, consider it all joy. Think about joy. Think about how you can receive joy. Find the best circumstances in your circumstances. Find the best way to receive joy from that and through that, and even in spite of that, what you're enduring. Make the decision, do what is right. And I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but that's what James is over and over and over. In illustration after illustration that we have. And so there's no way we should take that out of context in chapter 4 in verse 17, where the rest of the book, he's talking about how we really can have confidence and we can really know that we are doing what is right and we can make decisions that is right and we can find joy and confidence. But then we have one verse that just destroys all of that and says, well, and by the way, if you're not doing what you should do, at any given point, you're sinning. How can you sin and not even know it? That's a good question. So look at then toward the end of chapter 4, starting in verse 7. We talked about this a little bit last night about being submissive to God, being open to God, not being haughty, but to draw near to him, to cleanse your hands in verse 8, and purify your hearts, to stay single-minded, focused toward heaven. You will find what you need. And we talked about how that relates to chapter 1 about needing wisdom. If you need wisdom to make it through the challenges of your life, pray to God and he will provide it for you so that you can get through it. Keep your eyes on the prize and not on the problems. And then you'll find good success. But we get so caught up. It's like Peter when he walked on the water. Wasn't that a great, magnificent thing? Remember when Jesus walked on the water and they were afraid it was a ghost and he said, "It is I, don't be afraid." And Peter said, "Well, if it's really you, call me out there to you." Now, previous to that, they'd been on the boat before with Jesus in a storm, and they woke Jesus up, and they were kind of chiding him. "Don't you care that we're about to die here?" And Jesus rebuked them because they didn't get it. Now, they thought that they were asking Jesus for help, but he said, "You don't need my help," basically is what he's saying. You don't need my help. And Peter figured that out. He learned a lesson. And in the next section, or the next time he's on a boat, Jesus wasn't on there, but he saw him walking on the water in the storm, and Jesus said, "It's I." And Peter said, "Hey, I don't have to worry about it now. In fact, if it's really you, call me and I'll come out." Now, logically, if it was Satan, he probably would have called him out anyway, right? Because he would have wanted to see Peter drown. I don't know why Peter asked that question, but he spur of the moment. So he's in faith. He looks and says he learned his lesson. And he steps out on that water, and then he's walking toward Jesus, and he almost makes it to him. I know that because when he started to sink, it says Jesus reached down and picked him and pulled him up out of the water. He almost made it to Jesus, but what was the reason that he fell? He failed because he started looking at the waves around him. He started looking at the problem. He took his eyes off of Jesus. When we look at that kind of situation, we understand it's a good illustration for what we are trying to do. Keep your eye on the prize. Keep looking for the way that God has provided for you to have joy from your situation. But don't be haughty. Then he talks about that in verses 11 and 12. We're in James chapter 4, 11 and 12. Don't speak evil of one another, brethren. Don't judge each other. That relates to this pathway. Now, we all know that we can make judgments about each other. You judge me and I judge you. We all make judgments. We have to make judgments. In fact, if I'm sinning, I hope you'll make a judgment and you'll come tell me, "Listen, brother, I think you're doing wrong here." That's obviously not what he's talking about. But there are things that you decide to do that no one has a right to judge you on. You know, if you're standing in this pathway, if you're on this pathway of desire that leads to a concept of doing the wrong thing, you have figured out how to do it wrong, and then you sin, and then you die. If I'm on this process, yeah, you need to judge me. You need to make a decision that I'm doing what is wrong and talk to me about it. But then if I'm avoiding that, and I'm stopping the sin, and I'm stepping out in faith, and I'm doing what God tells me to do, who are you to tell me I'm not doing it right? We can't. If I'm not doing wrong, how can you tell me that I'm not doing it right? Right? So if in your decision-making process, just to put it on a practical level, if you for some reason you decide, well, I need to move, I can't walk up to anyone and say, "Hey, you're doing wrong." You can't do that. You're doing something wrong. I can't make that kind of a judgment. I've seen people, though, that really try to be the judge. They think that everyone should toe the line and do exactly what they're told by elders or whatever. I remember a lady. I don't know all the circumstances, so I'm kind of judging on the outside here. But from my perspective, this is a lady that I was visiting a congregation, and she was so excited because she had a Bible study at her house. And she'd invited some people over, and they studied the Bible together and had a good time. And she was telling an elder about this. And the elder looked at her and said, "Nobody authorized you to do that." And she got this look on her face like, "What?" Said, "You can't have a meeting in your house unless the elders tell you can do it." They had no right to judge what she did in order to obey God. Now, if she was doing wrong, yeah, but that's not wrong. Let people make up their own mind how they're going to live and do it. Live that way. So don't be haughty. He's talking about that in verses 11 and 12. He says in verse 12, there's one lawgiver who is able to save and to destroy. Who are you to judge another? Well, that's a great point. And if you are sitting in judgment upon other people, he says, he who speaks of evil of a brother and judges his brother speaks evil of the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you're not a doer of the law, but a judge. And God didn't make you judge. So when you are judged, the reason is because you think that you're better than everyone else, and you're going to sit down in judgment upon them. When we start going through the process of growth, we have to be very careful that we don't become haughty, we don't become arrogant, and think that we have all the answers. Then he says in verse 13, come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go and do such and such, go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, and make a profit. Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. But now you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil. That was a really tough passage for me for a long time. It's still not quite something that I have a full understanding of. My question is, why is it so evil to say you're going to go somewhere without saying, if the Lord wills? And the only answer I have is that because we're talking about people who have left God out of the process. You know, it's easy for us to think that we can have all the answers, and all we have to do is look at what James says to do, and we've calculated this is the path, and now this is the new path we're on, and we don't think that God is involved. There's the arrogance we're talking about, and I think it's an appropriate way to end this book. He goes on to talk about that in the rest of the chapter, of chapter 5, about we need to make sure we keep God in the process, that we think about him, we give room for him to do whatever he's going to do, and not assume that we have it all figured out. We don't. Even when we understand if you've come to a new understanding, you may have already known all these things, but now you have this understanding, you see the process, but that doesn't mean you have it all figured out. Let God have room in there to do his work and allow for him to change things if that's what's going to happen. But sometimes we get arrogance and we think, I'm going to have my plans, I'm going to make my plans, and we don't even think to include God. And in that context, in that idea of boasting, he says in verse 16, but now you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So he is talking about arrogance here. And with knowledge puffs up. So we have a tendency to do that. And now I have it all figured out. To illustrate this a little bit further, I think I mentioned this before, but you know, a psychologist can take the principles that are taught in James, an atheistic psychologist, let's put it that way, can take the principles that are taught in the book of James and put it into practice, in their practice, and they can teach it to people, and this will actually help people. And they can teach it without any reference to the Word of God. They can teach it without any reference to what God says or even a belief in God, but they just teach them, hey, this is the pathway, and you need to find a new pathway, and they can give them advice on what pathway they need to choose, and that will help them effectively, and a lot of people do that. But that's completely void of having God in the discussion, isn't it? And so what we need to make sure we always do is keep God in perspective in our minds and of what he is going to do, what we allow him to do, and to depend upon him and lean on him for the fulfillment of, hopefully, the fulfillment of our plans. And therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. Now, you have all these principles that we've talked about, and warning signs, things to watch out for. And he ends with arrogance, which tends to destroy all the work that we try to do for the Lord. And because we have this step-by-step process of how to change our lives for the better, he says, therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. So in the context of that pathway of righteousness, now that you have a grasp of how to change your life and how to make better decisions. The failure to do that is a sin against yourself. You're hurting yourself beyond anything else. He says there, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. Now, whether or not it's sin against God, I mean, you could probably make the argument, but that's not James's point. You're hurting yourself. You're sinning against your own self. You know, Paul says that there's only one sin that's against yourself, and that's sexual immorality. But I can sin against myself in a sense because I can hurt myself. And I can shoot myself in the foot. Have you ever heard that phrase? I do it all the time. I shoot myself in the foot. Why? Because I'm not doing what is right. So a person who knows, you have your hands on this way of changing your life, and you have the capacity to make it better, and hopefully, I don't know, but I hope that in this week, you've learned to start thinking about some of the reasons that you do some of the things that you do, whether it be good or evil. Think about why do I do that? And when we have that understanding, then when you have that and refuse to, you're not going to get what you should out of it. So if you want to find joy in the problems that you're facing, the way you do it is to follow what God said, put it into practice, to do it. And so I think that's what he's talking about here in verse 17. Therefore, to him who knows to do good and doesn't do it, it's sin to him. So take what you have, what you've learned, and put it into practice, and things will be good. But here he also says to be patient. Look in chapter 5 and verse 7. Therefore, be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits the precious fruit of the earth, waiting patiently for it until it receives the early and latter rain. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Now, I don't understand also, there's a lot of things here that I don't get. But the coming of the Lord, I don't know if he means the coming of the Lord in the end of time, which he could mean, or the coming of the Lord in the sense of salvation, or because, there's been a lot of quote-unquote coming of the Lord, especially in the Old Testament. The Lord is coming in judgment upon people, and the Lord is coming in salvation for his people. And I'm not questioning whether or not there will be an end-time judgment to come. Surely there will be, but there are also times where God is going to step in and intervene in your life and make things better. And God will help you, whether that means now or at the end of time. God is still going to be there to help you to make that process, but he says to be patient. And we talked about that at the very beginning, to let patience have its perfect work. In other words, you endure to the end. You carry that load into the end of your trial, however long that trial is. And again, there is no such thing as a trial as a Christian that never ends. It always has an end. You just don't know when it is. It could be literally at your death, yes, but it may not be. It may be over in a day or two. But whatever length of time that you have it, you carry your load and you make the right steps, and you make sure that the decisions that you make are helping you to serve what God wants to happen in your life. And he talks about that. In fact, look in verse 11. He says, indeed, we count them blessed to endure. You have heard of the perseverance of Job and seen the end intended by the Lord, that's passionate and merciful. So you know what happened to Job. Now, that's a strange comment to a degree, because it makes you think about Job, because you could read the whole book of Job and not see that anyone thought that God was being very compassionate and merciful. In fact, you see that as the opposite. That's what Job complained about. Why are you being so uncompassionate and unmerciful? And his friends the same way. God is wreaking vengeance upon you because you've sinned against God, basically what they were saying to him over and over and over again. So he didn't seem like God was being merciful and compassionate, but at the end he was, and that's what he was driving for. He was hoping that Job in the end would do exactly what Job did and give glory to God, even in the midst of his pain and his struggles. And when it's an amazing book, because you see a progress of his growth in his relationship with God. At first, it was he looked up to heaven and said, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord. And then it got really bad for him, and he started really struggling through it, and it started really be painful. And as he went through this process,
you can see where he starts shifting his thinking. He stops thinking physically and stops thinking the way he always thought about why he's being suffering and how confusing it was because he knew he hadn't done anything wrong and yet he was being punished. And you see a shift in his thinking to now he realizes this has nothing to do with punishment. This has everything to do with me looking toward God and looking toward what God has promised me in heaven if I would be faithful to him. And he had some revelation about the fact that heaven is going to be the place where he's going to find judgment and he's going to find justice and everything will be better again. And when he came to that realization, that's when God showed up in the whirlwind and approached him and had those 4 great chapters of all the questions that he asked Job. Why did he do that? Because he was ready then to hear those questions. And those questions just pounded him over and over and over with the realization that Job was not God, that Job didn't see the big picture, that Job didn't understand what was happening, and he couldn't understand what was happening, but God was in control. And God was going to bring this about the way he intended to bring it about. And then it says, of course, that Job, interestingly enough, though it implies it never said that Job was healed, but he did get children again. He was healed, but because he had to have children. He had children again. He had everything resupplied to him, all that he had lost. And it wasn't about the blessings, the physical blessings. It's about the spiritual blessings that he would have gotten. It forces us to think about what is he talking about with Job and recognize the fact that there is an end process. There's an end game here, and we need to get the most out of it. But if you want to get the most out of it, make sure you follow what God says, and then you will have it. This is a lot of things here in this last chapter that's encouraging us to make sure we stay focused and stay committed to doing what God tells us to do. And if we will do that, everything will be fine. That's the message, I think, of this chapter, and also of chapter 4 and verse 17. And I hope that you will not be discouraged in thinking that, well, I don't think I'm doing enough. I don't think it's about that. There are times when if you see that you have an opportunity to do good and you just flat refuse it, yeah, we can make an argument that you should have done that. But we can't walk around thinking, man, there's 100 things I could do right now, but I'm not doing them, and so I can't be saved. That's not what God teaches. But what he does teach is that you need to look at your opportunities, your situation, and make decisions based upon what he tells you and step out in faith. And when you do, things will be good. But be patient. It takes time. And that's the hardest thing. Be patient for the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits. That's chapter 5 and verse 7. The farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, waiting patiently for it until it receives the early and latter rain. I think Greg, he said he grew up on a farm. Isn't that right? Can you imagine Greg planting corn one day and walking out the next day and kicking the sand just mad because it wasn't grown yet? It doesn't happen that way, does it? You have to wait. That's the bad part. And it may be hard for you. You may be hurting. But if you're consistently doing what God tells you to do, you are going to get the most out of that you can possibly get. And your life will change. It will be so much better. I'm thinking that I would much rather endure suffering and come out the end of it a different person, a better person, than to endure the suffering and still be as like I was before, or maybe even worse. It all depends on your decision-making process and how patient you are, how much you endure. Put on that baggage, so to speak, and carry the load and do it looking for, recognizing your need for God in your life. I want to emphasize that as we close. That is, we all need God. You can't make this. You can't do this by yourself. You can make decisions, but you're going to need his help to carry the load. And he is able to help you. There's nothing that he can't accomplish. And Romans chapter 8 is a really powerful passage when we look at this. If we put our confidence and our faith in God and remember that It is through him that we have this ability. He says in verse 37, yet in all these things we're more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I'm persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. And he wants nothing more than for you to make it through your challenges. He wants nothing more than for you to grow and mature and be better than you in the future than you are now. Produce that fruit. And if you will make the decision, you can do that. So I'm not sure. When do we get out? I was thinking. Was I wrong about that? Do I have a little more time? Well, and then I'm not giving an invitation until later too, right? Is that working? Bell ring at 10 till. Okay. All right. All right. So just as a quick review, then I've kind of said everything I'm going to say, but I want you to think about the fact that James gives us an outline for how we can live the best. Your best life is dependent upon your decision to act and stay away from this pathway that I've illustrated so many times. I got 5 minutes. And, and that clock, I think, is wrong, too. Oh, I'm okay. Stay away from this pathway where you're making the wrong decision. And that decision about your desires, it can come before your desire. You have a desire based upon a need. You also have a desire to do good, and you just make the wrong decision. You have a good desire, but you have the wrong application. When that happens, you still can be on the pathway of death. You can still want to do what is right. Saul's a great example of that, by the way. He said in Acts chapter 23 and verse 1, he said that he lived in all good conscience before God. Even in his past life of killing Christians, he did it in good conscience. He thought he was doing what is right. He had the desire to please God. There's no question about that. But that desire led him to have the concept of doing something that was actually evil. He didn't understand. And so you need to make sure that you're looking at God's word and following it, and then we will have the success that we need. And I appreciate you very much. Thank you for your time, and we're going to call it quits right now. Thank you.